kick us off.
Dope. Okay. Awesome. So I'm going to share my screen shortly, but I want to sort of preface this with this is sort of an early share of some of the themes I'm seeing in the research. There's still quite a bit of data processing to happen, and I'm aiming to have sort of a publicly consumable deck in about 4 weeks that has a more structured sort of analysis of what we've discovered in this project. So this is going to be a pretty casual conversation. I'm going to share a Google Doc that we're going to sort of go through, and have 3 stories we'll talk about that characterize some of the archetypical people that I'm seeing who are using sort of open source Bitcoin tools, Bitcoin Core nodes. And then we'll also look at some charts that visualize some of the data from one of the surveys that we participated in. All right, let me share my screen. How do you do that on Jitsi?
Bottom left, second button.
Okay.
Or the center button.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Can you all see the Google Doc? I'm going to shrink you guys.
Yeah, all good.
Okay. All right. So this is Project Horizon. I just want to quickly go over some of the original goals and the intent of the project. So this was sort of a strategic design project in that it is not, the outcome isn't like a pixel perfect GUI or like, concrete products. It'll be more concept and UX level stuff where we start to understand the sort of distinct directions and different kinds of products that would serve different types of users. So some of the key questions we were asking was what kinds of people are currently using the Bitcoin Core wallet and why? What are key elements of the official Core wallet that would bring the most value? Why do people run nodes? What are their profiles? What are tangible benefits of the nodes to some of these folks? So that was sort of the initial start of the project. So by the numbers, this is where we got to with research. We did 17 interviews with a variety of Bitcoin users. I've anonymized all the names in the research. This was sort of a promise I made to everyone that participated that what they've said will be public, but their name will never be associated with what they've said. I spoke to people from New Zealand, Indonesia, Venezuela, Brazil, Japan, Syria, South Africa, US, and Canada. I had 4 interviews with BTC devs. I had 400 plus respondents in the survey that I led, and then I contributed to another survey that Shira Frank led. That had about 1,000 plus respondents, and they were sort of characterized pretty differently, asked different questions. And then I tested core wallets for Monero, Decred, Haven, and Chia just to sort of understand what core wallets and other projects are doing, and then tested some mobile wallets. The methods that were used, I'm going to zoom through this as well since it's not super important to the casual conversation. We're going to have ethnographic interviews, so those are 1.5 hour interviews that we did. I had some concepts I shared in the interviews. So I had sketches of about, I think 11 or 12 different products that I would share. And those were not products that I was proposing. They were more sacrificial ideas. So ideas to sort of tear apart or say like, oh, I like this, we should dial this up. To sort of understand what people value in those conversations. It's easier to sometimes get that sense from a tangible thing versus, a loose conversation. Card sorting, I had people sort their preferences if they were to download get a new wallet that they would move all of their hodling coins to. What would be the most important things? And then the survey, of course, which I mentioned. Okay, so I want to share some of the graphs from the survey that I led first, and feel free to jump in with any questions or conversation. This is super casual. I see that I have a message in the Jitsi chat. I just want to see if for notes.
No, that's just me. Yeah, just to make a few notes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, just holler if you have any questions. So this is a chart that shows of the people that responded, and this is from the survey 1, which was basically the pool that we were sourcing people from was Square Crypto followers. So on Twitter, we had about 400 plus respondents, and this is sort of when they were asked what is the best way to store Bitcoin. This is how they responded, and you can see that Bitcoin Core Wallet is a little sliver here. We had 7 people. say it's the best place to store coins. Most people obviously said hardware wallets. Then there's Casa, a couple custodial people. And the way we were trying to serve, like this survey was a little bit of data gathering, but also recruiting for interviews. And so we had questions where we were trying to sort of suss out people's attitudes and behaviors around open source. So this is, one question, like, have you ever run a node? We had about equivalent yeses and nos. And then we also had questions around people's technical competence. So like, how technical would you say you are from a scale of 1 to 7? And this is also the number of people. I'm getting an echo now on my voice. Someone just exited. Okay. This is a chart showing yeses and nos and I don't know for if I've run a node, and also people's technical competence. Kind of just interesting to see like the proportion. Obviously, more technical people running more nodes, which kind of makes sense. And this is a chart that shows people's reasons for running a node with their technical competence. So red is most technically competent, 1 being least technically competent, or 7 being a professional software developer or someone who's highly technical. And then these are the reasons for running a node. So to experiment and learn, to support and strengthen the Bitcoin network, to elevate my security and privacy, to accept payment, and my reasons for running a node are listed here. And so you can see the proportion of technical people have a higher proportion of that sort of point of view of elevating privacy and security. But at the same time, it's very clear that experiment and learning and the numbers here I think are just about as high as this to support and strengthen the Bitcoin network. So generally, it's kind of it's almost like a non-functional when it comes to my Bitcoins, non-functional purpose for running a node. It's more of a goodwill thing or an exploration and learning thing. And then here's just like the numbers for just overall, like the different reasons people were running a node. And you can see there, the 3 on the left here are the big ones, and generally these 2 combined are much bigger than this one. Any questions so far? Am I going too fast? Is this information not useful? Should we jump into the juicy stuff?
All good.
Okay. This is about scaling people's knowledge of Bitcoin. So how knowledgeable, 7 being extremely knowledgeable, and then people's preferences for what they think the best place to store Bitcoins are. And generally, it's like the hardware wallets just outshine everything. And core wallet, to be honest, shows up in a couple places, but it's, close to nil.
Hey, Jamaal,
Yeah.
be careful that since it's recorded, you have some email addresses there. You probably want to hide that column.
Oh, shit. Can we actually cut that out of the recording? I'm sorry. I actually want to make sure those do not get in the recording.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that after. Yeah, don't worry. I'll do that.
Okay, thank you, Con.
Yeah, but hide the column. Hide the column.
Yeah. I'm gonna. We're actually done for the chart, so I'm gonna actually go to this part. I appreciate that. That was totally definitely not intended.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah. Okay. So some of the interesting nuggets for the project, and I had sort of chatted. I had chatted a little bit about this before the meeting started. Is I had in some of the interviews with the Bitcoin Core devs, I had one of them say that we should totally kill the Bitcoin Core wallet project, the GUI, right? Obviously, the node should live on, but that core dev in particular was just so adamant about how poorly designed and bad of an experience it was. And there are stories that sort of characterize, in some ways, how bad the welcome mat is for newcomers. This is an example of one. So there's someone named Josh. Again, these names are all anonymized, except for now sharing the emails that we're going to cut. Thank you, Johns. So Josh is a marketing consultant in Washington State. and he's someone who I would characterize like someone who really believes in Bitcoin now, but he actually accidentally ran a Bitcoin node. So when he first got into Bitcoin, he said he downloaded Bitcoin Core Wallet from the website. I ran it and ended up syncing the whole blockchain without really realizing what the crap was going on. I just thought I was taking forever until I started up. So I just left it there. It took like a week and a half, but I thought I was starting a Bitcoin wallet, which I really didn't understand what that meant. So I had accidentally run a Bitcoin Core node before realizing what I was doing. And that sort of characterizes a couple interviews, which is a pretty terrible, again, I call it the welcome mat, sort of first journey of moving beyond becoming just sort of a participant in cryptocurrency as a sort of broad idea before you sort of become what I am characterizing as an ideologue and like really understanding and believing in these sort of self-sovereignty or sort of responsibility for your coins in a way that I would say characterizes Bitcoin culture. And so his journey sort of went from Edge Wallet, Coinomi, to Bitcoin QT, Bitcoin Core Wallet by accident, to Lily Wallet, to Casa, and now he's using Spectre and MyNode. And so there's actually a lot of journeys that are sort of similar, where there's a lot of churn, and people somehow end up in Bitcoin Core Wallet and end up being shot out the other side. It's like a momentary thing. It's almost like an accident. Another quote from Josh: when the Casa node came out, I thought it looked kind of cool. I bought it on a whim. I didn't really understand what it was or what the point of it was. And it was after I got the Casa node, I realized that this, I didn't really think this was doing anything. And I thought it was kind of pointless and what the point of it was in the first place. And it's interesting to see this journey because he's also someone that now really believes in the node software. So I think this is sort of a quote that I thought was really interesting, kind of like almost like an underappreciated part of how we talk about nodes. So he said, there's a couple things I really appreciate about having my own node. It gives me a level of privacy, which I do appreciate, even though I'm not one of those huge privacy advocates where I'm like, oh, the government is spying on me all the time. My mind doesn't go there. But I know this might sound stupid. Bitcoin can't die as long as I'm still alive, because as long as I'm running my node, I'm still going to keep the Bitcoin chain running. Like, it can't go anywhere as long as I'm here. And I think that's amazing. I'm just like, wow, I have the ability to support and keep the Bitcoin network alive and make sure the 21 million archive is kept. And I feel like that is sort of like the thing that I felt, at least for someone like Josh, is actually much more powerful than the privacy narrative, and why he keeps running the node. But I feel like with this, with Josh, and there's a lot more detail that will come out in sort of the fully fleshed out deck with this experience using Lily Wallet, and he actually tried to run after Bitcoin QT and after Casa node. He tried to run his own node, and there was a lot of challenges with that too before he got to my node. And that sort of stack where he says it's like, you know, even my node, he has a lot of complaints about. The stack still feels like it's designed for insiders or for technical people, which I know that there's this dance that we have in Bitcoin in Bitcoin where it's like sort of like a lot of technical insiders will say, oh, it's your responsibility. You have to know these things. It's kind of like taking ownership of things. But I think there's still a lot of design space to design ownership and sovereignty without being overwhelming. Like a UI or like, you know, I think it's my node. I have to look back at my notes, but I think there's like an app store or something with like so many different things in it that you can choose. And like, you know, someone like Josh has no idea what they are. So I think there's still a lot of design space to design the way this stack can be built. And the conversation we had before we got into this, I had mentioned standards. And when he was trying to set up his node before my node, that's sort of the UI or the UX experience for a non-technical person, where it was pretty crappy. And there was a lot of reasons why he couldn't get his node to work with the wallet choice he had. I'm going to jump to Nathan, who's a software dev in Japan, this first quote isn't necessarily anything that has product implications, but I thought it was kind of funny. Like he was on Bitcoin Talk early on and thought Bitcoin was a scam, and when the empty Gox hack happened, he thought people were just so stupid, and then he was on Bitcoin Talk, and people were still like very pro Bitcoin and buying more Bitcoin, and he was like, people can't be this stupid where, you know, if something gets hacked, they want to like kill the CEO or find the CEO, but these people are still Bitcoiners, and they're still like genuinely excited about this, and that's what caught his attention. So jumping way down into the interview, he talked a little bit about his preference for cold card. So I like that it's a little bit of a pain in the ass to use if you want to use it. Like, you store your coins in this place and you don't have to manipulate them. I use the whole hardware wallet for my HODL stash, coins that won't move for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And I also use a hot wallet for donations on BTC Pay server. Basically, it's a Bitcoin stash where I just keep it here. And if I lost my server or the keys or it's hacked, I'm perfectly fine. But if it does go above what I'm comfortable with, this is sort of in the amount of Bitcoin and the value of it, there's 2 ways I handle it. I spend them on a gift card at Bitrefill, or I send them to a Wasabi wallet. And then I mix them, and then I send them to my cold card. And I thought this was also interesting because it's not something that's just unique to this person. There are other sort of people who came into Bitcoin, were using a certain wallet architecture, and then Bitcoin's value skyrocketed, and they find that they actually have a lot more money in a way that's not safe. And so for me, what this sort of 2 things I think about, one is like, this is not a static thing. It's almost like there's a flow here, right? With Nathan in particular, he has 3 wallets set up: the cold card, and then he has Wasabi, and he has the hot wallet. And it's sort of designed to be a trickle where you can move money from the hot wallet to the cold wallet in a way that fits that person's sort of point of view on security and privacy. And I feel like these transitions or these flows are not something that I haven't really thought about them. And I feel like there's something around designing or thinking about like Bitcoin over time, or enabling people to use these multiple architectures in a way that sort of elevates their safety and makes them feel comfortable. Any questions or comments so far? This is sort of like, again, this is a very loose processing of data so far. So if there's discussion or even thoughts on a quote, I would love to hear them, because it's also going to be helpful for me, and it's great to sort of discuss some of this stuff now as well.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, it's actually kind of interesting that he talks about, he likes the fact that it's kind of a pain in the ass to use the cold card. You know, as like UX designers, that's kind of interesting to hear someone, you know, be like, oh, I actually preferred the crappy UX. Was there anything in particular which, I know maybe you didn't ask for questions on that, but was there anything in particular that he was kind of referring to there? Whether it was like, you know, having to enter in long seed phrases or numerous passwords, or like, do you have any more detail about what that was?
Yeah, so he talked about, I mean, obviously besides it being a sort of separate device, I think there's 2 passwords you had to enter on cold card, if I remember this interview properly. I actually haven't used a cold card myself. I think there's 2 passwords you have to enter. So there's like a bunch of hurdles to use. You have to obviously hook up the device. It's just sort of one of those things that gates your access and gives you a little bit more ease and peace of mind.
Okay, cool.
And there's an SD card specifically with the cool card that you pull out and put in with the PSBT.
Yeah. And we talked a bunch about Bitcoin Core Wallet. And so this person uses BTC Pay Server quite a bit. And Bitcoin Core Wallet is hard to use with the GUI directly. It's not very good because if you install it on your laptop, it's not always on, so you always have to wait before you use your wallet. It's just not a good experience, which is something that, again, is sort of like has come up several times in interviews, is the challenge of, it's almost like the dominant preference. If you're going to run a node, everyone I spoke to, they may have like an extra laptop if they're like a technologist, like proper software developer, but almost no one who's like developing software, everyone is doing like external hardware now, Raspberry Pis, from the interviews. Anyone who's genuinely interested is doing that, because it's not feasible for most people to have this wallet open all the time and syncing. Or if you want to send something, you open it and then you have to wait, 4 hours or 5 hours before you can do anything. And I'm not using the wallet to track UTXOs for my BTC Pay server because the API for Core Wallet is very bad. The API falls short on what users are expecting. And every time you have a problem with this, it requires a lot of effort because there's a lot of review for Bitcoin Core. It means it's easier to try to make your own wallet than to try to use Bitcoin Core. That's why people make their own wallet trackers. Merchants have a lot of addresses, so a lot of wallets can't handle the number of addresses. Fully Noded is good, and it's built on BTC Core. Some BTC Pay servers are using that. This next quote sort of alludes to the standards conversation we were having earlier. One element of it, so wallets are using XPub, but they interpret XPub slightly differently, which means that sometimes even if you share the same XPub, it may not show up the same balance. You enter an XPub on one software and you'll have something called a wipe up, and then another software you have a zip up, and you just can't use a zip up on another piece of software that's using wipe ups. So this kind of mismatch between protocols of two different implementations, I would love to solve this way of sharing information between products. How do you provide read-only access to your wallet, read-only access to your wallet to other pieces of software? And this is sort of a theme that's come up in a couple different domains, in mostly, obviously, more technical users, where a lot of people are building these modular, I don't know what to call them yet, like a sovereignty stack, or we'll call it a Bitcoin hodler stack, where people will use one piece of hardware, one piece of software, another type of hardware for a node, and the way that you connect them all has been challenging for technologists, but also it ends up being can be a pretty terrible experience on the user experience side for non-technical users. There's another wallet developer that I spoke to for this project who has been involved with the air-gapped community, and he's been trying to set standards there, but he's also felt some pushback from people on setting standards, because some people are very adamant that Bitcoin is open source, decentralized, no one controls it, and there shouldn't be standards. We'll jump to the last one, the last sort of story here. So Gustavo is a front-end dev in Brazil, and this is sort of an extreme user, I would say, when it comes to that modularity. So he has a hot wallet on his cell phone. He uses Samurai wallet, but he uses a USB stick, just a plain old USB stick, and he calls it his code wallet. So he encrypts his wallet files with a passphrase, and then he will, when he wants to actually, sign a transaction, he will turn on his computer in read-only mode. This is a bit past my technical expertise, where he says the OS boots up in memory only, and he will sign the transaction in an offline way, and then submit his transactions online. And so he's using a Python tool that Peter Todd made to sign transactions offline, and then he will either send his transaction on blockchain.info, because it's he created constructed the transaction, and he's like, nothing can happen, they can't do anything, or I'll submit it via the CLI on Bitcoin Core Wallet. And so this is, again, one of these things where it's, again, someone's own stack and way of using tools. Modularity, that's one of the big themes. Those are sort of the three archetypes I have for now. Again, this is very it's about 4 weeks away from having a finished sort of consumable content, but it's basically people who are non-technical, who are believers, ideologues, and then technical users, and then sort of almost technical hacker users. Those are sort of the archetypes of people that I'm seeing using Core Wallet in some way, or that could be users of Core Wallet if it was, constructed in a different way, because it feels like it's not a great product for, in a lot of ways, not a great product for anybody, because even the CLI, I feel like, has a lot of scripts missing from the technical interviews, I have a lot of complaints about the CLI as well. Any questions or comments or discussion?
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
Good to see you, Jamaal.
Likewise.
It's been a minute. I came in like a little bit late. I was gonna come in like on time, then I was like, wait, we're already in the chat.
That's okay. I think the timing was a little bit messed up for.
I kind of love it though. It's like keep you on your toes kind of thing. So I came in like halfway through. You might have already covered this. I came in around like the cold, probably not even halfway through, more than that. I came in near the cold card part.
Good. I'm gonna
with a lot of people where I'm like links. How do we keep up? But my main thing is like you might have talked about this. How are you defining people who are technical versus non-technical? Because I feel like especially for like a design chat, right? Like some people are very technical and they're designers. Some people like are, and I really don't know where that starts and stops. But I would be curious to see kind of like how you define them because you have these archetypes.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I haven't quite got to nailing these down yet. This is sort of super early chat where there's a couple themes that are popping their heads up. I think technical actually has a couple different forms, which I'm glad I don't know if you're hinting at this, but there is like I'm a software developer sort of technical thing. And there's also technical users who can navigate the technology in a way that like, they may not be writing their own code or using the CLI, but they understand enough about how Bitcoin works to understand how things connect, because it's not super easy yet to sort of construct your own stack here. Right. And so there is different ways that people are technical or the ways that people are comfortable. Like Josh, for example, the first person I talked about, who is a marketing consultant. He's not a software developer, but he's navigated this process himself. And he sort of grew up around technology and technologists. So he has that comfort and ability to sort of go through this. But there are things that do scare him. Like in some of these interviews where I would call people non-software developer technical people, for lack of a better term right now, it's like they still have fears around something fucking up and having to use the CLI because they don't know how to navigate that part. It's a language in an area that is it's a language they can't speak, and it's basically like it's a dark forest, right? It's basically where you have to rely on other people, which is also dangerous in this domain. It's like relying on other people to resolve your problems when it has to do with your Bitcoin. It's like, how do you bring people close enough to understand the problem without giving them access to the, computer, et cetera, and risking your coins? So to me, that's sort of an area as well that is challenging. But does that answer your question? It's not totally defined well, but I think there's different ways of sort of describing technical.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, that was like more than I even asked, so thank you. But I agree. I think there's like a lot of complicated aspects around just accessibility and like people wanting to be generous with their time and energy, and that trust aspect is very hard. I think like going back to like defining the user would be super helpful. And like, I know that changes all the time because like threshold for like technical users is changing all the time, and like what people expect to be like the baseline changes. But just in terms of like understanding for like someone who's looking at this document the first time, like we're here and I can ask you that question. But I think unless it was like articulated, like if I was to like watch this back and be like, I don't know, like that might be like, having like maybe like 5 main qualities.
This document is not for public consumption. This is purely
no, I get that. I get that. But I'm just saying like it might be easier to kind of like, I don't know, group people in or something.
For sure. That is part of the goal, is to sort of have, it's like attitudinal and behavioral archetypes. I think archetypes and personas are typically, in my opinion, not very useful in design. But I think having like, rather than like market type of archetypes, like how people view things archetype of how they view like privacy or safety or technology, or their ability to navigate these things, to me, that is a better way of sort of characterizing or typing people. And I'm hoping to do that for this, for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I had a question.
Please, lots of questions and discussion.
First, hello to, there's a few faces I've not seen before. I think it's Edward and Reed. So hello guys, nice to Thanks for joining. And hello to everyone who kind of joined some way through. Jamaal starting as well. Hi, hope you're good. I was wondering. So there's this idea of I guess I've written down like progressive wallet architecture, where like a user wants all the modularity from the outset, but once number go up, that architecture changes, and perhaps some of the reasons they initially wanted to run their own node, some of those things take a back seat for convenience. Do you see that being the case with some of these use cases?
I want to make sure I understand what you're asking, Connor. Are you saying that when number go up technology is activated, when the number goes up and the value of someone's coins are worth a lot more, the other things that they were interested in for sort of almost like further edification or exploration, like a node, those go by the wayside? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. Well, do you see that being the case in some ways? Because what is the driver of the progressive wallet architecture? Is it the fact that the value of the coins has gone up, so now I actually need to think about how I secure this in a way that has the trade-off or the balance of convenience and security? Yeah.
So there's actually a confluence of things that I've noticed happen. So one is, yes, there has been interviews. There's another fella from one of my New Zealand interview where he did migrate his coins over time and did sort of a hop between wallets and systems from paper wallets. That's where he started. To his current setup, and it was because the value was going up, and he's like, oh shit, I have these like papers, and like, you know, how do I store these? What do I do with them? Like, so there certainly is a little bit of like fire under the feet when number goes up. But I also noticed that there is, and this is sort of a confluence where it's like people sort of buy into or start to own this ideology, and they not only end up either putting more money into Bitcoin, or they just realize the importance of this system and how it reflects their beliefs, and they sort of like, you know, start to build the tooling that fulfills that ideology that they want to own now. And so it feels like it's a mix of two things. I feel like they are a little bit intertwined. I feel like once someone goes, you know, gets fully subsumed by the religion, they may go in the deep with the money too, which also causes them to make the move.
Okay. Nice.
Now, did you get anybody in the 17 people that you interviewed that had less technical, like no?
Yes, absolutely, yeah. I want to make sure I understand what you mean by that, Alexa. I didn't mean to cut you off. What do you mean by less technical?
I mean, I know I kind of like the software developer or the front-end developer, and it seems like it's people that generally know code somehow, like you said, even if it's just subtly knowing what you read, even if you can't write it. I don't know. I'm thinking on my own experience with Node and how part of it is not even knowing that it exists. That was the case for me. I think you tend to hear of all of these wallets, and I had no idea what it was or that it even existed. And when it did, even though I don't have that much technical knowledge, then it was something that I wanted to kind of dive into. And I wonder if part of it is just that you don't know, and eventually you kind of come across it and it's kind of a shock, and then you try to make it work, and that's kind of how you go. It's a unique journey. You kind of grow.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if I have people who are not technical in the sense that they don't write code and don't really know how to read it, but they have got to a place where they're almost technical in how they use Bitcoin tools. And by technical, I mean there's like a stack, or they're using a node, or they're using some, you know, stuff that doesn't require code, but isn't like, you know, doesn't look like an Apple product. And the reason was we sort of filtered out for this. So in the survey, bringing people into the project, we focused on getting people who are sort of past like the assumption was that, you know, Bitcoin Core Wallet, no matter sort of what it becomes, is going to be an open source product, and is probably not going to ever be as clean as like a product designed by Apple. And so you kind of have to have people who are bought into open source, like they genuinely want their Bitcoin products to be open source, and have some belief around storing coins themselves, or are doing it, whether they like know it or not. And so we kind of filtered out for people who are like, I don't know if I've run a node, I don't know what Core Wallet is, I don't really care about open source, and like my coins are on Coinbase. Because those people aren't necessarily people we're designing for, or it's kind of a stretch. And there's this tension, and I mean, we can talk about it now. It's like Bitcoin is designed for everyone, but will Core Wallet, which is kind of like the way I had described it before we dove into the content, was like, it's kind of like one of those nuclear control rooms with a lot of dials and like levers. And it's super complicated, and the UX kind of sucks, but it's like for a power user. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that forever or in perpetuity, and that's not what we're assuming it's going to be. But I think we have to have some assumption that people are somewhat in the frame of mind where using a non-Coinbase product, non-custodial tool, matters enough. So we filtered out for a lot of, I would say, people who are, I would almost characterize them as like participants, and less of like people who are like not necessarily even like 15% bought into sort of the ethos of the space. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. It makes sense that you filtered for people who are more into Bitcoin.
Yeah. And we were trying, and it's part of the reason I asked the question of like, how technical are you regarding software? It's because I wanted to make sure that not everyone I was automatically getting was a software developer. I tried to find people that are like, have the attitude or the like point of view about open source or you know, self-custody, and aren't super technical in the software development sense.
Did you discover any like surprises? Anything surprised you along the way?
I mean, a lot did, actually. I feel like articulating what those things are, I can sort of popcorn them. There's some of them I've shared here where it's like, you know, someone using Python to write Bitcoin transactions, and then sending them via Bitcoin Core and keeping their like, you know, encrypted wallet files on just a straight up USB key. I think, let's see here. Let's see if I can look at. I think the challenges with Bitcoin Core, I had tried it. I didn't realize like how, you know, having a core dev tell me that the core wallet should just be killed was surprising. I think that took me a little bit by surprise. I thought it would be the opposite. I thought it would be like, this is good enough, and like, you know, it may not be a super high priority, but like, it's good enough, and like, if you know what you're doing, it's good enough. But having one say it should just be killed was surprising.
Did he give you any specific particular reason why?
Yeah. The ones that I can remember, I'll have to go through these notes again as I go through. I have to go through all of these notes as I start to make this deck, but is that nobody's focusing on it enough, and it's kind of terrible experience. It's a terrible experience. Like I think some people can shoot themselves in the foot, and there's enough stuff being built out there for GUIs that it's not really needed, and it just like isn't a good representation of the project.
Interesting.
This is maybe. Oh, go ahead. I can ask later.
I was just going to say, just to take it back to your previous point about like the technical users versus non-technical users and stuff like that. And you made it obviously pretty clear like how you want to focus your research. And it makes sense to like talk to people who are actually using the product in order to figure out like how to improve the product or whatever it is. Do you think in some ways as well, I mean, I know that you haven't for the sake of the study, so maybe this question is just pointless, but
no pointless question.
Do you think it's also important to figure out like why a non-technical user hasn't used this product just as much as like it's important to figure out why someone has or hasn't like enjoyed the product from a technical perspective?
That's a superb question, not a stupid question, because it is actually a core question, right? It's not like this project, almost everyone I interviewed is not using Bitcoin Core Wallet, right? If I had only talked to Bitcoin Core Wallet users, we would basically be, and this is part of the challenge, it's like different approaches to solving this question of like, what should the core wallet be? It's like, when I work on projects where it's like, we only want to talk to users who are using the incumbent product, you end up polishing a turd. Potentially, you're sort of stuck in the bubble, right? And it's like UX improvements. It's like, okay, that button's hard to use. Well, okay, but like, what is the product? What is it supposed to be doing? And so this was talking to people who may have touched the Bitcoin Core Wallet. Not everyone has used it. Some people used it by accident, but pretty much everyone is not using Core Wallet. In fact, it was very hard to find people. I did talk to someone who was using Core Wallet. As they're like, that's how they hodl their coins, but they are someone who is like born into the Bitcoin project in that they have been part of it for, longer than anyone on this call for sure, and they are a core dev, and they have a unique point of view on like trust and what product is worth using, and like they've been using it the entire existence of Bitcoin basically, but everyone else is not really using Core Wallet. So in that sense, that is how I approach the project, is like, how do we find people who are navigating outside of Core Wallet because it's not a good enough product, and they're finding a way to do what they wanted to do, hacking together all these things, like building their own stack or failing to build their own stack, and then just, falling on Casa because everything else for multisig was way too stressful, which is what some users did.
So I got a question from like a lot earlier that I wanted us to go into.
Let's do it.
You said that the gem was coming. I've been waiting for it. So yeah, you were talking about like standards and like some of the outcomes and stuff, or some of the things that you learned just in yourself. That some kind of need or a call for standards came out from this. Could you talk about like how you arrived to that?
Yeah. So I feel like it's, and I almost want to say, I feel like standards aren't necessarily what I'm proposing based on this, but I feel like there's a need to find a way for things to interoperate. Whether it's a standard or not, I don't really know. And the way I got there, John, to answer your question, is like, some of the folks I talked to, I think only 2 of them are like wallet developers outside of Core Wallet. Like, they're building sort of like periphery products. Some are working on BTC Pay. One's working on a Sparrow wallet. And the challenges they've faced to like get the functionality to work in their wallet and like interoperate with like hardware wallets or with outside nodes or with something like, with Electrum, downloading the blockchain and indexing. Those challenges are slowing everyone down and causing a lot of challenges on the user side, where it comes up with, I gave up setting this stack because like I downloaded this, I installed it, I bought a Raspberry Pi, and I was on I went on the Discord or whatever the chat server was for this thing, and they like made it seem like I was wasting their time asking for help. Like that experience where there's a lot of gaps in how things interoperate and building a stack seem to be like there's missing standards is what I've called them. Standard setting. There are supposed to be standards, I think, for how XPubs are used, but it seems like there's challenges with how that's also interpreted or defined. it feels like something that a lot of people are struggling with, whether it's like literally, building the wallet or on the user side. I don't know. Does that answer your question, Johns?
So you're talking about it both on the technical and on the UX level for those kinds of like recipes or standards or whatever you want to call it, but it's like it's on both sides. How data is shared, for instance, and also how it's presented.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it is like a technical thing. It's like, the wallet devs are trying to make their products interoperable, and they can't do it very well. And then it bleeds out into the user experience where it ends up causing errors or problems. That's kind of how I see it. And I think one of the devs I talked to was saying that there's been challenges with setting standards in some communities because some people push back on a standard being a form of centralization or someone being in control. But I think there's got to be design space for setting how these things sort of interoperate.
Yeah, I think it's a very important foundation that we need to establish because first off, we're building like global money, right? And it's decentralized. You have multiple people who are creating different wallets and architectures and stuff like that. And the user should have the ability to be able to move through those systems. As you were saying, the flow isn't static; it's more liquid, right? So having an ease to move between those different architectures as required in that point of time is quite needed. I've been a lot of my research so far. I've been looking into what I'm calling now like creating like a set of abstractions, and this is just mostly on the UI side, but it does touch on some of those technical aspects. So creating a set of abstractions for things like output descriptors, xpubs, addresses, all these different small parts of the components of the protocol, and creating abstractions and those abstractions serve as a way to communicate to the user, but also like within varying levels of like between stakeholders with like different knowledge sets, So like the way that you talk to an engineer and like a designer or like some business person or whatever, telling them about like xpubs and stuff, it goes straight over your head, right? And when an engineer starts to explain that, it's like, what's the purpose of this, right?
Yeah.
So. Yeah,
and that's also part of the challenge right now is like, I feel like when I say technical users that aren't software developers, it's like, you have to know what an xpub is, right? That is a technical piece of knowledge. It doesn't mean you're a software developer, but like to build your own stack, you have to know what an xpub is to some degree, right? And so that is, to me, one of the distinctions that sort of Patricia was pointing out or sort of alluding to, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess like some direction that we could possibly like explore as well is like, instead of looking at the implementation detail, which is like the xpub, maybe look at like the capability. What does the xpub allow you to do? And there's various things similar to an xpub, like an output descriptor, for instance, that gives you a similar kind of capability, right? And the capability might be the thing that the user like really cares about.
Right.
So that's the thing that may just need to be communicated. Well,
yeah.
Thanks for that. Yeah. I'd love to have a chat more with you about this. I don't want to take up too much. But,
No. I'm hoping to also articulate some of the particular things that were issues for the wallet developers. I mean, obviously, xpub sort of definition and interpretation is one of them. But there's a couple things that came up in it. I'm hoping to articulate them in the sort of public consumption deck. Yeah, but I'm happy to talk offline, Johns, or like once I have sort of these notes better summarized.
So no worries. I'll share some of mine as well.
Dope.
Cool. I was just gonna say we have about 10 minutes left till we stop officially recording and stuff. So is that fine with you, Jamaal?
Totally. Yeah. I'm flexible. I have more time too, and
Cool.
happy to chat more.
How about Reed and Edward? Did you guys have any questions?
I was wondering, yeah, like you were talking about, and we've talked about this, a few other people brought it up, but with like the normie user who keeps their Bitcoin on Coinbase, I mean, isn't that like who we're trying to, I know maybe not for this wallet, but in general, aren't we trying to make Bitcoin more accessible to people like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Absolutely, we are. The question is this the path or vehicle for that? And this, I should also be clear. This project is not at all sort of in that domain of solving that design challenge of how do you move someone from Coinbase to running a full node. That's for sure outside the scope of this project. But I think part of the challenge when designing something, it's like you can find people who have sort of gone through that journey from using Coinbase or eToro or whatever some of these users were using, and gone to sort of running their phone full node and running Spectre Wallet, and learn from them, and learn what they wish they knew and what they wish existed, and that can inspire a lot of design tools. What I think this project certainly can't do, but I think to your point, Reed, is like changing people's hearts and minds about what Bitcoin is, which is a whole other design challenge, right? Like to have someone who's just sort of a participant on Coinbase, I would say like someone who's sort of a cryptocurrency participant, changing their heart and mind on what this is and their belief system, that is a whole other design challenge. And I think there is awesome work to be done there. But I feel like it's it's sort of a different scope and different approach than sort of building the tools. It certainly is part of it, but I feel like it's a much different and very challenging design space.
Yeah, definitely. And so with your work, it sounds like you're segmenting people into kind of like these like normie people versus the really technical people. Do you think that eventually like products like the Bitcoin Core wallet should be designed to suit one of those particular segments, or should it be something that
I should put it this way.
I
should put it this way. I'm not segmenting people necessarily on how technical they are. I would say it's more so around like participant versus becoming almost like an ideologue is the term I'm using for now. It's a little bit of a jokey term. But to me, that is the difference, because a lot of these people weren't technical. And technical, and I'm saying, again, there's like technically navigating the space, the products and tools, and there's like technical software developers. I'm talking about people moving from sort of being a participant in the cryptocurrency world to sort of moving to being like almost like a Bitcoin ideologue, and then sort of going deep on their own on like building their own knowledge and understanding of how to navigate the system, because it still is pretty challenging to navigate. But that drive, that sort of like attitude and value that they took on is the driver for that. And so to me, that's sort of the step. It's like, it's not that we want to build the tools for people that are technical. In fact, we don't want to do that. We want to make them easier to use. But the challenge is, right now they're technical. There are ways we can make them easier. We're sort of hinting at some of them with this project, right? A lot of the issues we're facing. But the chasm between being, again, like a participant and like having this belief system, that is a different design challenge. And then how do we make it easier once you're in that space to be a deep participant, or like a sort of a deep owner of how you view Bitcoin and hodler, whatever we want to call it, enable you to have the tools to sort of live those values that you now have in a way that's not super technical or difficult to do.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna add to Reed's point that it's definitely, it feels like as much as it is a design challenge, it's also an educational one as well. I'm doing some work to try and help with that. It's like asked the question all the time: where do you send your friend, family, cousin, brother, girlfriend, boyfriend? What's the first thing you send them when you want to introduce them to Bitcoin? Do you just take them through an experience of sending them Bitcoin and getting them to experience it that way, or do you need to tell them the why Bitcoin's important? And if you do come to that conclusion, where do you send them? And if you ask probably everyone in this call that question, everyone will probably say a different thing. Some people will say, go and read the Bitcoin Standard. Some people will say, I will just send you some Bitcoin. Some people will say, watch Andreas Antonopoulos. So depending on who the user is, would depend very much on what educational path you send them down and how successful that is. And then that changes from culture to ethnicity to like it changes a lot. So I think if we can have those places where we can say, this is where you need to go, where you want to learn, and that's kind of like the inception of someone's journey, and then they go into a world where they have all of these products and services that underpin what they've learned, we will start to develop some really solid Bitcoiners, which is, I think, one that should be like an important thing as well.
Yeah. I also want to add that this project in a lot of ways was also specifically exploring nodes and why people run nodes, why they have abandoned running nodes, and running a node is sort of I would still characterize it largely as an act of goodwill at this point. And to get there, you kind of have to have those values and attitudes, right? It's not something that someone who's a participant on Coinbase is going to do. Mm-hmm. And so unless the value of it increases, and I mean like that's a subjective thing, unless the value of it increases, like whatever someone gets out of it, that could be something that feels more product-y besides sort of like aligning with my value and keeping the Bitcoin network running. I feel like it's still going to be a niche thing for those people who buy in to the ideology.
I totally agree with that. And actually kind of interesting what you just said about like the value increasing. And I guess how like values change. That could be, for example, like, we were saying number go up, whatever. Mm-hmm. That could be like the literal value of your stash, right? Mm-hmm. And then from that, you then put more of a value on like security. I was thinking it would be kind of interesting if we could simulate some sort of like testnet phishing attack on like a whole bunch of Coinbase users and see if we can like stun them into becoming like super privacy oriented, because that that's kind of a way of like, I don't know if anyone's experienced like a phishing attack or something, but it's like, when you walk across the street and a bus goes past, you suddenly realize the value of looking before you cross the road. And you have these moments of being like, oh my God, the value, which I wasn't recognizing before here, has just increased massively over here. And I feel like that's what a lot of Bitcoiners go through in their life cycle, is having these different moments of like, oh, that's the value, or this is the value. Because I feel like everyone will value a lot of these core features. It's just a question of like when.
Yeah.
I know about the phishing attack one.
Okay, and so we send a bus through the custodial wallets? Is this what we're doing?
Yeah.
Okay, you let me know when.
We need an email list first. Yep.
I think people can also learn without getting hurt along the way,
Agree. That's why I said testnet, guys. Okay, I'm not super malicious.
You say that though. Some people. It depends though. It's like anything. Like sometimes you do need to be scarred in some ways to learn. Like sometimes, like that's the best teacher in life. Sometimes, like ultimately you learn from someone else's mistakes, right? But sometimes life doesn't always pan out like that. So,
well, you also have environmental factors at like. Jamaal, you did the Open Money Initiative, right? Mm-hmm. And this was like collapsing economies and whatnot, and those people like value self-sovereignty and perhaps privacy. because of the environmental factors that they face, right? And like we are seeing like a rise in this, the big uproar with Facebook's privacy things on WhatsApp, that's actually a good sign for us, right? Because people are paying attention to, oh, this company, privacy, they have all this data. I don't want this. Whatever the policy was, they still got, worked up about it. And yeah, so I think we're kind of going in a direction where people are kind of like also waking up as well and being a bit more cognizant. But the thing that they lack is the experiences. There's tools, but then you need to figure out how to put them together. So, but what's the experience of that? Why is it only like Wasabi and Bitcoin Core that has this, Tor integration as soon as you boot it up and Bloom filters and stuff? Why aren't my mobile wallets also protecting me in this kind of way? So
yeah.
Cool. I'm gonna stop the recording.
We're off the record now.
Yeah. Unless there's anyone that wants to answer a question that they want on the record.
Off the record. I got some
Let's talk
gems.
about that phishing attack again now.